When the impossible breaks through into reality, the first thing you feel is the silence before everything burns. He wasn't summoned by choice, he was pulled through by our desperation. No negotiations, no warnings. Just a warrior who turns hell itself into a graveyard. But what happens when the only thing standing between humanity and extinction refuses to leave? The particle accelerator beneath the Franco-Swiss border had been screaming for 11 seconds when the first law of thermodynamics broke. Dr. Emilia Vargas watched the containment field collapse through 6 inches of lead glass, watched the numbers invert and multiply, watched the temperature inside the collision chamber spike to levels that should have vaporized the entire facility. Instead, the air crystallized, froze, then shattered like obsidian glass. Through the fragments came a light that had no color, a sound that existed before frequency, and a presence so absolute that every living thing within 3 kilometers stopped breathing at exactly the same moment. The slipgate was 17 centimeters wide. It took 4 seconds to expand to human height. In that time, 3 physicists suffered simultaneous cranial hemorrhages. The facility's AI core went catatonic, and Emilia Vargas became the first person in recorded history to see a god step out of mathematics itself. He was not followed by demons, he was preceded by them. The Slayer emerged in silence, his armor absorbing light like a wound absorbs blood, and the world remembered what it meant to be prey. Emilia did not scream. Her training held, barely, as her mind catalogued impossibilities with the desperate precision of the dying. The figure stood 7 feet tall, encased in armor that seemed both medieval and post-atomic, covered in scoring that suggested battles fought in environments where matter itself was optional. His visor glowed with a light that her instruments registered as existing in negative wavelengths. Behind him, the slipgate pulsed once, twice, and then vomited a cascade of geometric impossibilities into 3-dimensional space. They were not creatures, not yet. They were the idea of hunger given just enough form to tear. The first demon materialized as a howl wrapped in too many limbs. It lunged for the nearest technician, a young man named Andreas who had been checking radiation levels. The Slayer moved. There was no telegraphing, no preparation. One moment he stood motionless as a tombstone. The next, Andreas was stumbling backward, unharmed, and the demon was decorating 12 square meters of reinforced concrete in wet, steaming pieces. The weapon in the Slayer's hands defied categorization. It resembled a shotgun the way a cathedral resembles a wooden hut. When it fired, reality flinched. Emilia hit the evacuation alarm. The sound died 3 feet from the speaker, crushed by a pressure that had nothing to do with atmosphere. More shapes poured through the slipgate, each one an offense against biology and reason. Imps, her mind supplied uselessly, because even in existential terror the human brain demands labels. They shrieked and capered, their claws sparking against the floor as they scattered toward the fleeing scientists. The Slayer stepped forward, just 1 step. The nearest demon exploded into fire and fragments before he even raised his weapon. The others converged on him like a living tsunami of claws and malice. He disappeared into the mass of writhing bodies. For exactly 2 seconds, Emilia thought him overwhelmed. Then the mass began to disintegrate from within, chunks of burning flesh flying outward in mathematically perfect arcs. The Slayer emerged, his armor barely scratched, dripping with ichor that sizzled and evaporated on contact with normal matter. In his left hand he carried something that had been ripped from the chest cavity of a larger demon. It still pulsed. He crushed it, and the thing's death scream shook dust from the ceiling. The slipgate was growing. Emilia could see through it now, past the membrane of tortured space-time, into a place where the sky was made of screaming faces and the ground was layered in fossilized agony. Hell. Not metaphor, not symbol, the actual, literal foundational realm of torment that every religion had sensed like radiation from a distant sun. And it was spilling into her world. The Slayer was already moving toward it. Not away. Toward. He stepped over the bodies of the fallen demons, his boots leaving smoking footprints, and for one terrible moment Emilia thought he would simply walk back through and leave Earth to burn. Instead, he stopped, turned his head fractionally, the motion impossibly slow and deliberate, his visor fixed on her, through her, into depths she had never known existed within her own soul. She felt herself weighed, measured, catalogued according to criteria written before stars learned to die. Then he moved again, toward the main reactor core, and she understood with absolute certainty that he was going to destroy everything. She ran, not away, after him. Her rational mind screamed at the suicide of it, but some deeper instinct, the same one that made prophets and madwomen, drove her forward. She caught up to him in the primary corridor, where emergency lights painted everything in shades of blood. He did not acknowledge her, did not slow, but he did not kill her either, and somehow that felt like communication. "Wait," she gasped, hating how small her voice sounded. "You cannot just destroy the reactor. The explosion would level Geneva. Hundreds of thousands would die." He stopped. The corridor was narrow enough that she could have reached out and touched his armor. She did not. Even standing still, he radiated a lethality so profound it had gravity. When he turned to face her fully, she saw the runes carved into his armor, saw them pulse with a light that her eyes interpreted as green, but her soul knew was something else entirely. Something older than color. "Please," she whispered, "there has to be another way." The Slayer regarded her for 3 heartbeats. Then he moved past her, back toward the collision chamber, and she understood. He was not going to destroy the reactor. He was going to close the slipgate from this side, which meant he would be trapped here, in her universe. Cut off from whatever eternal war he had been fighting. The thought should have brought relief. Instead, it filled her with a dread so profound she tasted metal. By the time she caught up to him again, he had already begun. The slipgate howled as he approached it, the edges fraying like burning paper. More demons pushed through, larger now, things with too many eyes and geometries that her brain refused to process. The Slayer killed them methodically, his movements efficient to the point of prophecy. Every shot found critical mass. Every punch liquefied demonic architecture. He fought like mathematics, like the inevitable solution to an equation, written in blood. But he was also adapting. Emilia watched, her scientific training reasserting itself through the horror as he examined the slipgate's structure between kills. His gauntlet interfaced with it somehow, his armor's systems speaking a language that predated human physics. She saw data cascade across surfaces that should not have had displays, saw probability matrices collapse and reform. He was learning Earth's rules, bending them, breaking the ones that inconvenienced him. The slipgate shuddered, contracted. The stream of demons became a trickle, then stopped entirely. For 5 seconds, nothing emerged. Then, something else began to push through. Something vast enough that reality had to stretch to accommodate it. Emilia saw a hand first, large enough to crush cars, covered in symbols that burned themselves into her retinas. Then a shoulder. Then the beginning of a head crowned in brass and malice. The Slayer stopped what he was doing, raised his weapon, and opened fire on the emerging Titan with the patience of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. The shots tore chunks from it, slowed its manifestation, but did not stop it. Could not stop it because it was not fully physical yet. Still half-rooted in hell, it could not be killed by weapons designed for 3-dimensional targets. So the Slayer changed tactics. He holstered his gun, reached into a compartment on his armor, and withdrew something that made every atom in Emilia's body try to flee in different directions simultaneously. It was a blade, but calling it that was like calling the sun a light bulb. The crucible, her mind supplied from some deep archive of racial memory, and she knew without knowing how she knew that she was looking at a weapon forged before the concept of mercy had been invented. The blade ignited. The color was red, but red the way a thermonuclear detonation is bright. It did not emit light. It replaced whatever light had been there before with its own authority. The Slayer drove it into the slipgate's edge, into the membrane between worlds, and dragged it downward in a cut that severed more than space. The Titan screamed, its voice shattering every piece of glass in the facility as the portal began to collapse around it. It thrashed, tried to pull itself through by force of will alone, but the crucible's cut was absolute, final. The slipgate snapped shut like a closing eye, bisecting the Titan through its torso. The top half fell forward into Earth's reality, hitting the floor with an impact that registered on seismographs in Morocco. The bottom half fell back into hell, and Emilia heard cheering from the other side before the portal sealed completely. Demons, celebrating the death of something they had feared. The Slayer stood motionless, the crucible still active, its light painting his armor in shades of divine wrath. Then he deactivated it. The blade collapsed back into its hilt, and the sudden absence of its presence felt like a physical blow. The facility was silent except for distant alarms and the settling of debris. Emilia approached the bisected Titan, her scientist's curiosity overriding her survival instinct. The flesh was already decomposing, sublimating into a black mist that her instruments could not classify. She knelt beside it, careful not to touch, and examined the wound. The cut was perfect. Molecular-level precision. No tearing, no burning, just separation, as though reality itself had agreed to the division. "What are you?" she asked, not expecting an answer. The Slayer was already walking toward the exit. She scrambled to her feet and followed, because the alternative was to remain in a room that smelled like sulfur and burning ozone, surrounded by the corpses of things that should not exist. He moved through the facility like he had memorized its layout, which was impossible since he had arrived minutes ago. Unless, she thought with mounting horror, unless he had not arrived at all, unless he had been summoned, called, pulled through by the experiment itself. They emerged into the surface-level control center to find it abandoned. The staff had evacuated successfully, leaving behind coffee cups and family photos and the mundane debris of lives interrupted. The Slayer paused at a terminal, his armored hand hovering over the keyboard. Then he touched it. The screen lit up, not with the facility's operating system, but with cascading text in a language Emilia did not recognize. Cuneiform, maybe, or something older. The characters moved and reorganized themselves, and she realized with a start that they were not being displayed. They were being burned into the screen from the other side. The Slayer's suit was interfacing with Earth's networks, learning, downloading the entirety of human knowledge at speeds that should have melted the hardware. She watched as maps appeared, population centers, military installations, power grids. He was not just looking, he was cataloging, prioritizing. And then she saw what he was looking for. Anomalies. Energy signatures that matched the slipgate's frequency. There were dozens of them, all over the world. Some stable, some growing. One in particular, over North America, was pulsing like a diseased heart. "Oh God," Emilia whispered, "they're everywhere." The Slayer terminated the connection, turned to face her. And in that moment, without a single word spoken, she understood everything. He had not come to save Earth. He had come because Earth was already lost, already infested. The slipgate had not opened by accident. It had been a response to a call, a distress signal that her species did not even know it had sent. Hell had been seeding her world for years, maybe decades, disguising its incursions as natural disasters and inexplicable phenomena. And now the harvest was beginning. The Slayer walked out of the control center and into the late afternoon sun. Emilia followed and froze. The sky was wrong. It had been clear 20 minutes ago, brilliant blue and cloudless. Now it roiled with formations that hurt to perceive, clouds that moved against the wind and occasionally formed patterns that resembled screaming faces. In the distance, Geneva was burning, not from conventional fire, but from flames that burned upward instead of up, flames that cast shadows in impossible directions. "We need to evacuate the city," she said, pulling out her phone. Dead. Not just dead, but corroded. The battery had leaked, eating through the casing. She dropped it and saw that the pavement beneath her feet was cracking, not from impact, from age. Accelerated entropy, as though hell's proximity was causing localized violations of linear time. The Slayer was staring at the horizon, his stance suggesting either contemplation or targeting solutions. Then he began to walk. Not toward Geneva, away from it. Toward the nearest road, where a military convoy was approaching, their vehicles moving with the desperate speed of people who had seen the facility's external cameras. Emilia ran to keep up, her lungs burning, her mind already composing the report she would never get to file. The convoy screeched to a halt 20 meters away. Soldiers poured out, their weapons raised, their faces showing the brittle courage of men and women who knew they were outmatched by something but were committed to dying professionally. The officer in charge, a woman with French insignia and eyes that had seen too much, too quickly, began shouting orders. The Slayer ignored her, walked directly toward the nearest vehicle, a reinforced transport truck. "Halt, or we will fire!" the officer screamed. The Slayer did not halt. The soldiers opened fire. 37 rifles firing in synchronized desperation, their muzzle flashes strobing in the dying light. The bullets hit his armor and stopped. Not ricocheted, stopped. As though they had struck a surface that simply refused to acknowledge kinetic energy. A few of the soldiers screamed. Most just stood in shocked silence as the Slayer reached the truck, placed one hand on the hood, and crushed it flat. The vehicle's suspension collapsed, the engine block compressing to half its size. He turned to face the convoy, raised one arm, and pointed at the sky over Geneva, where the wrong-colored flames were spreading. Then he pointed at himself. The gesture was so simple, so direct, that even in her terror Emilia understood. He was telling them, "This is my fight. Stay out of it." The officer lowered her weapon. She looked at Emilia, desperate for any context that would make this make sense. Emilia could only shake her head, mute with understanding. The Slayer turned away from them and began walking toward Geneva, his pace steady and unhurried, and the soldiers let him go. What else could they do? Emilia watched him disappear into the distance, his armor blending with the gathering darkness, and then she ran to the officer. "You need to contact NATO. The Dame, UN." "Everyone," Emilia gasped. "This is not a local event. The energy signatures are global." "Who is he?" the officer demanded. "What is he?" "I don't know," Emilia admitted. "But he's not here to negotiate, and I think that might be the only thing that saves us." The officer stared at her, processing. Then she grabbed a radio and began screaming orders in 3 languages, and the world began its frantic scramble to understand what was about to be done to it. The Slayer reached Geneva's outskirts as the sun set behind clouds that would never allow day to return in quite the same way. The city was in chaos, its streets clogged with fleeing civilians and the overturned vehicles of failed evacuations. Fires burned in colors that had no names, spreading from building to building but consuming nothing physical. Instead, they ate hope, courage, the fundamental certainty that reality would remain coherent from one moment to the next. People ran screaming from things that were not there yet, driven mad by the presence of something their minds could not classify as anything but wrong. The demons had been subtle. They manifested in ones and twos, stalking through alleyways, dragging victims into darkness that swallowed screams. The Slayer found the first one crouched over a child's body, its jaws distended, feeding on something that had nothing to do with flesh. He shot it through the spine, the round punching through its torso and detonating the building behind it. The demon convulsed, tried to turn, died before it completed the motion. The child was dead, had been dead for minutes, long before the Slayer arrived. He paused for exactly 2 seconds, staring down at the small, broken form, and then continued moving. He found 6 more bodies in the next block. Elderly, young, one pregnant woman who had been torn open with surgical precision. The demons were not just killing, they were harvesting, taking something fundamental from each victim, leaving behind meat that, decomposed in fast forward. The Slayer's pace increased, not to a run, but to something more inevitable. A glacier's advance, if glaciers could hate. The first major nest was in a subway station. The Slayer descended into it, following the psychic reek of corruption, and found himself in an abattoir that had once been a transit hub. The walls pulsed with organic growth, flesh merging with concrete in cancer-slow metamorphosis. Imps hung from the ceiling like bats, their eyes glowing in the darkness. Larger things moved in the shadows, their breathing synchronized in a rhythm that suggested coordination. Intelligence. The Slayer raised his shotgun and opened fire. The first volley cleared the ceiling. Imp corpses rained down in burning pieces, their death screams alerting the larger demons to his presence. They charged, a coordinated assault that would have overwhelmed any conventional soldier. The Slayer walked forward to meet them, his weapon thundering in the enclosed space, each shot producing small-scale reality distortions. A Hell Knight lunged from the left, its fist crackling with stolen lightning. The Slayer sidestepped, let the blow pass close enough to heat his armor, and brought his own fist down on the creature's skull. The impact cratered the floor. The Hell Knight's head ceased to exist in any meaningful way. Two more rushed him simultaneously. He shot the first one through the knee, collapsing it mid-charge, then pivoted and delivered a kick that sent the second one through a support pillar. The pillar cracked but held. The demon did not. It slid to the ground in pieces, its internal architecture rearranged by blunt force. The first demon was still alive, trying to crawl forward on its hands, its ruined leg dragging behind. The Slayer stepped on its head, applied pressure. The skull collapsed like a rotten fruit. The nest's heart was deeper in the network, past turnstiles that had been torn apart and platforms that now served as altars to geometries that hurt to perceive. The Slayer followed the corruption's source, methodically clearing each pocket of resistance until he found it. A pulsing mass of flesh and energy rooted into the station's foundation, sending tendrils throughout the city's underground infrastructure. It beat like a heart, and with each pulse, Geneva died a little more. The Slayer examined it, his suit's sensors analyzing composition and vulnerabilities. Then he drew the crucible. The blade's activation drew every demon in the station. They poured from side tunnels and maintenance shafts, a living wave of claws and hunger. The Slayer met them with the crucible in one hand and his shotgun in the other, and the killing became artwork. The blade cut through demonic flesh like it was not there, cauterizing and destroying simultaneously. Nothing it touched remained alive. Nothing it passed could return. He carved through the horde with mathematical efficiency, creating a path to the nest's heart, and, when he reached it, he drove the crucible deep into its center. The nest screamed, not with sound, but with a psychic shriek that shattered windows across 3 city blocks. The tendrils convulsed, tearing free from their anchors, and the pulsing mass began to collapse in on itself. The demons scattered, their coordination broken, their purpose dissolved. The Slayer withdrew the crucible and watched the nest die, his expression invisible behind his visor, but somehow radiating satisfaction that bordered on religious ecstasy. He climbed back to street level to find the world had noticed him. News drones circled overhead, their cameras broadcasting his emergence to a planet that had stopped everything else to watch. Military helicopters kept their distance, their pilots having received orders that probably included the phrase, "observe only," repeated many times. Emilia's warning had spread through governmental channels, propagating faster than panic. And now, everyone with access to a screen was witnessing the same impossible figure striding through Geneva's ruins. The social media response was immediate and apocalyptic. Hashtags spawned and died in minutes. Religious leaders issued conflicting statements. Some called him an angel, others a demon wearing holy armor as mockery. Conspiracy theorists insisted he was a government weapon, alien technology, a time traveler, a hallucination shared by billions. None of them were entirely wrong. All of them missed the fundamental truth. He was none of these things, and all of them. a myth made flesh by necessity, walking through their world because it had called him with its dying scream. The Slayer ignored the attention, moved toward the largest energy signature, the one pulsing in the city's heart. The demons grew denser as he advanced, their numbers suggesting coordination from something intelligent. They threw themselves at him in waves, learning from each failure, adapting their tactics. The Slayer adapted faster. When they began using ranged attacks, he closed distance. When they tried to flank, he eliminated sight lines. When they attempted to collapse buildings on him, he simply walked through the rubble and continued forward. The source was in Geneva's cathedral, which seemed both predictable and perfectly blasphemous. The building's architecture had been corrupted, its sacred geometry inverted, its spires now pointing downward into cracks that led nowhere mortal eyes should see. The Slayer approached the entrance and found it guarded by something new, a demon he had never encountered before, its form suggesting it was native to Earth's particular dimensional frequency. It stood 12 feet tall, its body incorporating pieces of the cathedral itself, stone and stained glass fused with infernal flesh. When it saw him, it laughed. The sound shattered 3 of the surrounding buildings. The Slayer shot it in the chest. The round did nothing, literally nothing. The demon's hide absorbed the impact and converted it to something else, something that made the air smell like burning churches. It charged, moving faster than anything its size should move, and slammed into him with force that cratered the street. The Slayer rolled with the impact, came up firing, putting rounds into joints and sensory organs. The demon shrugged them off and swung a fist that would have liquefied a tank. The Slayer caught it. His boots skidded backward 3 meters, tearing furrows in the asphalt, but he held. Muscle against impossible muscle, argent energy against earth-corrupted rage. For 5 seconds they remained locked, and then the Slayer twisted. The demon's wrist snapped with a sound like breaking glaciers. It howled and tried to pull back, but the Slayer held on, pulling himself closer, and drove his helmet into the demon's face. Once, twice, 3 times, each impact producing visible shockwaves. The demon's head snapped back, its jaw dislocated, and the Slayer released its broken wrist only to grab its throat. He began to squeeze. The demon thrashed, its free hand tearing chunks from his armor, its legs kicking with enough force to shatter the already ruined street. The Slayer squeezed harder. Something in the demon's neck gave way, not bone but the fundamental structure that allowed it to maintain cohesion in 3-dimensional space. It began to dissolve, its scream devolving into static, and the Slayer held on until there was nothing left but smoking residue coating his gauntlet. The cathedral's doors opened for him. Not mechanically, but in the way dreams open when nightmares insist. He walked through into a space that had once been holy and now served as something else's throne room. The walls crawled with symbols written in languages that had never been human, their meanings incomprehensible, but their intent crystal clear. Desecration as prayer, corruption as worship. At the altar, something waited. It called itself a hell priest, though the title was translation rather than description. It stood wrapped in robes made from flayed reality, its face obscured behind a mask that showed different agonies depending on the angle of viewing. Around it floated dozens of smaller demons, their forms simplified to pure function, claws, teeth, malice. They attacked the moment the Slayer crossed the threshold, a coordinated assault designed to overwhelm through numbers. The Slayer met them with the plasma rifle, a weapon that had been charging since he entered the city. The shot turned 6 demons into superheated vapor and punched a hole through the cathedral's roof. Sunlight, wrong-colored and diseased, poured through. The Hell Priest raised one hand, and the hole sealed itself with flesh that grew like time-lapse fungus. It spoke then, its voice resonating in frequencies that caused stigmata to appear on the Slayer's armor. "You are far from home, Slayer. This realm has different rules, different gods. You are powerful, yes, but here you are just a man in a very good suit." The Slayer responded by closing the distance between them faster than physics should have allowed. His fist drove toward the Hell Priest's face with enough force to shatter steel. It connected with a barrier, an invisible wall that lit up with blasphemous equations, and the Slayer's momentum stopped completely. The Hell Priest laughed, the sound making the remaining demons dance in ecstasy. "Do you see? Your strength means nothing against our covenant with this world. We were invited. Summoned by the collective despair of billions, their faithlessness opened the door. Their cruelty paved the way. Their indifference gave us permission. You cannot fight theology with violence." The Slayer tilted his head, the gesture somehow conveying absolute disagreement. He reached to his back and drew a weapon that Emilia, watching via drone feed in a bunker 300 miles away, did not recognize. It resembled a rifle, but its barrel opened into a configuration that suggested it fired something other than projectiles. The Hell Priest's confidence flickered. "What is that?" it demanded, and for the first time, its voice carried uncertainty. The Slayer fired. The weapon produced no visible beam, no projectile, nothing the human eye could track. But the Hell Priest's barrier shattered like glass, and the thing behind it flinched backward, suddenly mortal. The smaller demons rushed to defend it, throwing their bodies into the weapon's line of fire, and they died. Not slowly, instantly, completely. As though they had been erased from the fundamental record of existence, the Hell Priest began to chant, its voice rising in pitch and complexity, weaving a spell that drew power from every corrupted soul in Geneva. The cathedral responded, its walls bleeding energy, its floor opening to reveal pits that led to places where geometry was optional. Things began to crawl up from those pits, entities that existed as mobile paradoxes, creatures that killed by, forcing observers to comprehend their impossible nature. The Slayer shot them as they emerged, his weapon punching through their non-Euclidean defenses, and when the magazine ran empty, he swapped to another weapon without breaking stride. The BFG 9000 had not been designed for Earth, had not been designed for any single planet, in fact, but for the spaces between them, the void where demons spawned from pure malevolence. When the Slayer fired it inside the cathedral, the building's architecture tried to contain the blast and failed catastrophically. The sphere of emerald annihilation expanded to fill the interior space, consuming demons and corruption alike, stripping the walls back to blessed stone. The Hell Priest shrieked and erected barriers with frantic desperation, layering protection upon protection. But the BFG's payload did not care about barriers. It cared about destroying demons, and it was very good at its job. The blast tore through the protections like they were made of hope and prayer, neither of which had any currency in the face of weaponized rage. The Hell Priest's robes burned away, revealing a form that was less physical and more conceptual, a thing made of broken faith and weaponized despair. It lashed out with tendrils of solidified blasphemy, and where they struck the Slayer's armor, the metal screamed. He ignored the damage, wading through the assault, closing distance by refusing to acknowledge that distance existed as an obstacle. When he reached the Hell Priest, he grabbed it by what might have been a throat. It writhed in his grip, its form destabilizing, and he dragged it down from its floating perch with the inevitability of gravity. It struck the floor and the impact cracked something fundamental. The cathedral shuddered, its corruption receding like a tide that had been told to leave. The Hell Priest tried to speak, to bargain or threaten or curse, but the Slayer's grip tightened, and whatever it had been about to say emerged as a wet gurgle. "You are alone," the Hell Priest managed, blood or something worse bubbling between its words. "Even if you destroy me, there are hundreds more, thousands. We are infinite and you are finite. You will fall, Slayer. If not today, then tomorrow. If not tomorrow, then eventually." The Slayer stared at it for a long moment. Then he tore its head from its shoulders with the same casual efficiency someone might use to open a bottle. The body collapsed, burning from within, its essence screaming back to hell through channels the Slayer could not follow. Yet, the cathedral sighed, its stones settling back into configurations that suggested peace, and the corruption drained away like water finding release. Outside, the sky began to clear. Not completely, but enough that stars became visible through the diseased clouds. Emilia watched from her bunker as the energy signature over Geneva collapsed, the readings dropping to near baseline in a matter of minutes. She pulled up global feeds, checking the other anomalies, and saw that several had diminished. Not eliminated, but weakened. As though the Hell Priest's death had sent ripples through whatever network connected them. He did it, someone whispered behind her. He actually did it. But Emilia was staring at the largest signature, the one over Chicago, and watching it pulse brighter, stronger, responding to Geneva's liberation with what could only be described as rage. The others in the bunker were celebrating, but she understood. This was not a victory, it was an opening move. Hell had tested Earth's defenses and found a warrior capable of resistance. Now it would escalate. She pulled up the Slayer's last known position and found him standing in the cathedral's ruins, motionless as a statue, his armor reflecting starlight like scales made of midnight. He was not resting, was not even breathing hard, as far as the thermal imaging could determine. He was simply standing there, waiting for the world to make its next move. Emilia opened a channel to every government listening, which was all of them. The entity in Geneva is currently stable, but appears to be preparing for relocation. I strongly recommend you clear a path and do not attempt containment. He is not hostile to humans unless they obstruct him, and obstructing him would be inadvisable. The response was immediate and chaotic. Demands for explanation, threats of military intervention, pleas for cooperation. She ignored most of it, focusing on the one voice that mattered. NATO's supreme commander, a British general who had been coordinating the global response. Dr. Vargas, we need to bring this individual in for questioning. We need to understand what we're dealing with. General, with respect, you cannot bring him anywhere. He goes where he chooses. The best you can do is stay out of his way and pray he chooses to keep fighting for us instead of through us. That is not acceptable. Neither is the alternative, Emilia said, flatly. He just killed something that was converting Geneva into a hell portal. The energy readings suggest it would have succeeded within 6 hours. He stopped it in 40 minutes. You want to contain that? Be my guest. I'll watch from here. The general went quiet. Then, reluctantly, what does he want? Emilia looked at the screen, at the solitary figure standing in the ruins. I don't think he wants anything. I think he is what happens when want gets burned away, leaving only purpose. And his purpose is to kill demons until there are none left to kill. And when he's done, I don't know, she admitted. I'm not sure he does either. But I suspect we'll find out long before we're ready. The Slayer began to move. Not toward an exit, but down into the pits the Hell Priest had opened. Emilia's instruments lost him within seconds, the depth and distortion making tracking impossible. She imagined him descending into Earth's wounds, hunting the tendrils that had rooted themselves in the planet's foundation. And she wondered if he would ever surface again, or if he would simply keep descending, following corruption down to its source, even if that source was buried beneath miles of stone and reality. 30 minutes later, he emerged from a storm drain 6 miles from the cathedral. Covered in ichor, his armor scorched and torn in places, but moving with the same relentless purpose. He oriented himself using stars the drones could not film, then began walking west, toward the Atlantic, toward America, toward Chicago, where the largest signature pulsed like a cancerous sun. The world watched him cross the French countryside, his path absolutely straight, diverging for nothing. When a river blocked his way, he walked along the bottom until he reached the other side. When a town lay in his path, he walked through it, and people came out of their homes to stare. Some fled, some fell to their knees. One priest tried to bless him, sprinkling holy water that evaporated before it could touch his armor. The Slayer ignored them all, his focus absolute. By the time he reached the coast, 40 hours after emerging from the slipgate, militaries had mobilized globally. The United States, seeing him approach, declared a state of emergency and began evacuating major coastal cities. The president addressed the nation, her face haggard from lack of sleep and excess of impossible briefings, and tried to explain that they were doing everything possible to understand and manage the situation. She did not mention the Slayer by name, but everyone knew who she meant. The silent warrior who had single-handedly held back Hell's first invasion and was now walking across an ocean to reach the second. The Slayer reached the water and did not stop, did not slow. He walked into the surf and kept walking, descending beneath the waves, his armor sealed against pressure and darkness. Satellites tracked him as a thermal signature crossing the Atlantic floor, moving in a perfectly straight line. And scientists debated how he was navigating without instruments. The answer, though none of them wanted to admit it, was that he was not navigating. He was simply walking toward demons, and demons called to him like gravity. 3 days into his crossing, the Chicago signature went nova. The city's downtown district erupted in flames that burned cold instead of hot, freezing everything they touched into crystalline agony. Buildings shattered under their own weight as their molecular bonds stopped cooperating with physics. People caught in the initial blast were not killed so much as translated into something else, their final moments preserved in ice that showed what they had become before they finished dying. The United States military responded with overwhelming force. Fighter jets dropped payloads that turned city blocks to rubble. Artillery batteries fired until their barrels melted. Nothing helped. Every attack seemed to feed the corruption rather than diminish it, as though violence itself was being converted to fuel. When a bomber pilot tried a tactical nuclear option without authorization, the missile detonated 3 miles from target, and the blast was absorbed by something that drank radiation like wine. Emilia watched from her relocated bunker, now in a facility beneath the Rocky Mountains, and she understood what was happening. The Chicago event was not an invasion, it was a summoning. Something on the other side had learned from Geneva, had studied the Slayer's methods, and was now creating conditions specifically designed to force a confrontation. Hell was baiting the trap with an entire city. The Slayer emerged from the Atlantic on the 4th day, walking up the beach in Atlantic City like a tourist returning from a swim. His armor steamed in the morning sun, seawater sluicing off in rivulets that left scorch marks in the sand. He paused at the boardwalk, water draining from vents in his boots, and for the first time since arriving on Earth, he seemed to take stock of his surroundings. Looked at the abandoned casinos, the empty streets, the hastily erected military barricades at every approach. Then he resumed walking, due west, toward the pillar of wrong light that marked Chicago's death. The military did not try to stop him. Instead, they cleared roads, established supply corridors, and set up observation posts at what they hoped was a safe distance. News networks followed his progress in real time, their helicopters keeping pace from above, and the world watched as he crossed New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Ohio. He did not stop to rest, did not eat or drink, simply walked 18 hours a day, sleeping in 4-hour blocks that left him looking more like a powered-down machine than a resting warrior. Demons began appearing along his route. Small ones at first, scouts and skirmishers, testing his response. He killed them without breaking stride, his weapons appearing and disappearing with practiced efficiency. Larger demons required him to slow, but only briefly. A Hell Knight ambushed him outside Pittsburgh and lasted 11 seconds. A pack of revenants tried to overwhelm him with aerial bombardment and became smears on the highway before their missiles even landed. The attacks increased in frequency and coordination as he approached Chicago. By the time he crossed into Illinois, he was fighting almost constantly, the demons throwing themselves at him in waves that suggested desperation or orders from something that wanted him tired, weakened. The Slayer did not tire. His armor showed increasing damage, yes, systems sparking and occasionally failing, but the man inside remained relentless. If anything, he moved faster as the attacks intensified, as though violence was food to him. Emilia tracked his ammunition expenditure and felt cold certainty settle in her gut. He was running out. Not immediately, but the mathematics were unavoidable. At his current rate of combat, he would reach Chicago with perhaps 20% of his starting reserves. Against whatever waited there, whatever had consumed an entire city and was still growing, that would not be enough. She opened channels to every weapons manufacturer, every military research facility, anyone who might have ammunition or equipment that could help. The response was exactly what she expected. Nothing they had would be compatible with his weapons. The Slayer's arsenal operated on principles that Earth science could describe but not replicate, using energy sources that required access to other dimensions. They might as well have been trying to reload a god's gun with good intentions. The Slayer crossed into Chicago's outer suburbs on the 8th day, and the world held its breath. The city was dead. Not evacuated, dead. The cold fire had spread through every district, turning it into a frozen hell where buildings stood as monuments to the moment everything stopped making sense. The military had established a perimeter 30 miles out, their orders to contain rather than engage. Nothing living remained inside. Nothing unliving either, if the reconnaissance drones could be believed. Just demons, thousands of them, crawling through the frozen ruins like maggots in a beautiful corpse. The Slayer paused at the perimeter, looking at the barrier the military had erected. Concrete and steel, reinforced with every material science Earth could provide, wired with sensors and weapons systems that could level a small country. It might have stopped a conventional army. The Slayer walked through a section of it, the barrier parting before him like cloth, and continued into the dead zone. The demons came for him immediately. Not in waves this time, but as a single coordinated mass, a tsunami of claws and rage that blotted out the frozen sky. The Slayer met them with everything he had left, his weapons thundering in continuous orchestra of annihilation. The plasma rifle overheated, and he switched to the rocket launcher. The rocket launcher ran dry, and he drew the shotgun. When the shotgun's ammunition dwindled, he switched to the chain gun, and when that began to fail, he drew the crucible. The blade cut through demonic flesh in sweeping arcs, each swing sending pieces flying in mathematically perfect trajectories. He carved a path through the horde, moving deeper into Chicago's corpse, following the psychic beacon that screamed from the city's heart. Behind him, demons regrouped and charged again. Ahead, more emerged from frozen buildings. Above, flying demons circled like buzzards. The Slayer fought them all. Fought for 18 straight hours, his armor failing piece by piece, his weapons depleting to critical levels, but never slowing, never hesitating. When his ammo finally ran to zero, he used his fists, his boots, his helmet as weapons. When a demon tore his shoulder pauldron off, he beat it to death with the severed piece of armor. When another scored a hit across his visor, cracking the display, he grabbed its skull and used it to clear a path through its fellows, swinging the dying demon like a club until its structural integrity gave out. And through it all, he advanced. Meter by bloody meter, block by frozen block, he moved toward the center of Chicago, toward the Sears Tower that had been transformed into a ziggurat of blasphemy, toward the thing that waited at its peak. The Hell Priest was larger than its Geneva counterpart, larger than anything the Slayer had fought on Earth so far. It stood 40 feet tall, its form incorporating pieces of the tower itself, steel beams jutting from its flesh like ribs, glass windows embedded in its hide like scales. Around its neck hung chains made from frozen souls, each link a person who had been in Chicago when the cold fire came. They screamed continuously, their voices forming a chorus that made reality unstable. "Welcome, Slayer," the Hell Priest boomed, its voice causing the remaining windows to shatter. "I am Baron Azmorath, third of the Obsidian Throne, herald of the glacial flame. I have prepared this place for you, a tomb worthy of your legend." The Slayer responded by throwing a piece of demon's skull at its face. The projectile struck the Hell Priest's cheek and bounced off harmlessly, but the gesture communicated everything necessary about negotiations. Azmorath laughed and gestured. The frozen city came alive with demons, thousands emerging from every building, every shadow, every crack in reality. They had been waiting, all of them, for this moment. The Slayer looked at the army arrayed against him, at his depleted weapons and damaged armor, and made a decision. He dropped the empty guns. All of them. Let them clatter to the frozen ground, worthless without ammunition, kept only the crucible. The blade ignited, and its light reflected in 10,000 demonic eyes. What followed was not a battle. It was a massacre that happened to flow both directions. The demons came in endless waves, and the Slayer cut through them like light through darkness, the crucible singing in arcs that left burning trails in the air. He moved with efficiency, born from eons of practice, every motion, economy itself, every cut, placing him in position for the next. He did not waste energy on flourishes or intimidation. He simply killed, over and over, until the pile of bodies around him grew so high he had to fight from atop a mountain of corpses. His armor failed systematically. Left arm servo, destroyed. Helmet display, gone. Right leg actuator, compromised. The suit that had carried him through hell's worst began to betray him, piece by piece, under the sheer weight of sustained combat. Blood seeped from gaps in the plating, his blood, proof that he was mortal after all. But he did not stop, did not slow. If anything, the damage seemed to fuel him, stripping away everything but pure purpose. Azmarath watched from its perch, its confidence eroding as the Slayer continued to advance. The Hell Priest had planned for strength, for endurance, for skill. It had not planned for this, for something that simply refused to acknowledge defeat as a concept. When the Slayer finally reached the tower's base, standing alone atop a pyramid of his kills, Azmarath descended to meet him. The Hell Priest moved with speed that shattered the sound barrier, its fist driving toward the Slayer with force borrowed from planetary cores. The Slayer dodged, barely, the blow passing close enough to tear away his damaged chestplate. He countered with an upward slash that opened Azmarath's torso from hip to shoulder. The wound burned with the crucible's light, refusing to close, and the Hell Priest screamed. It retaliated with chains, the soul links whipping out to bind the Slayer, wrapping around his arms and legs. The souls screamed louder, their agony amplified, and the Slayer felt their pain as weight. Azmarath pulled, trying to tear him apart, and the chains went taut. For 3 seconds, nothing moved. Then the Slayer began to pull back. Inch by inch, he drew the chains toward him, dragging Azmarath closer, despite its overwhelming mass advantage. The soul's screams reached a crescendo, and then something broke, not the chains, but the spell binding them. The souls tore free, their essence scattering like light through prisms, and the chains became just metal. The Slayer snapped them with a flex of his arms and closed the distance before Azmarath could react. The crucible found the Hell Priest's heart, if the thing had such an organ. The blade sank into the hilt, its light filling Azmarath from within, and the demon's body began to burn. Not with fire, but with the inverse of the cold flame it had spread across Chicago. Heat that felt like justice, light that looked like dawn. The Hell Priest thrashed, trying to pull free, but the Slayer held on, driving the blade deeper, until Azmarath's screams became whispers, became silence. The body collapsed, and with it, the corruption began to recede. The cold fire flickered and died, the frozen buildings started to thaw, and Chicago's corpse began its slow return to something resembling normality. The Slayer stood over Azmarath's remains, the crucible still active, his armor so damaged it barely qualified as protection anymore. Blood ran from a dozen wounds, his breathing came in labored gasps, and for the first time since arriving on Earth, he looked almost human. Then he looked up, toward the sky that was clearing, and everyone watching understood. He was not done. Could never be done, because somewhere in the world, demons still existed. And while they existed, he had purpose. Emilia pulled up the global scan, checking for remaining signatures. They were there, smaller now, weakened by Azmarath's death, but not eliminated. Scattered across 6 continents, some growing, some dormant, all waiting. She counted them twice, hoping the number would change. 47 active portals, 47 more battles like Chicago, 47 more chances for the Slayer to fall, because even he had to have limits. She opened a channel, broadcasting blind, hoping he would hear. "I don't know if you can understand me, don't know if you care, but I've found fragments in the data you pulled from our networks. Archives from places that shouldn't exist, files corrupted in ways that suggest other universes bleeding through. One of them mentions a UAC facility in Nevada, buried, hidden since the 1950 seconds. If it's real, if it has what I think it has, you might find supplies there, ammunition, maybe even a way home." She had no idea if he heard, no way to confirm reception. But when the Slayer began moving again, his path bent slightly southwest toward Nevada, and she allowed herself to hope. He walked out of Chicago's ruins, past military forces that parted like reeds, past news cameras that broadcast his departure to a world that no longer knew whether to worship or fear him. His armor was little more than scrap held together by willpower, his weapons gone, his body damaged in ways that should have been fatal. But he walked, and the walking was enough. 3 days later, outside a town in Nevada that did not appear on any map, the Slayer found the entrance. It was buried under 50 years of sand and bureaucratic amnesia, hidden behind security that had failed decades ago but still tried to warn him away with automated voices. He walked through the layers, descending into depths that smelled like old oil and older secrets, until he found it. The UAC facility was small, experimental, a failed attempt at something the engineers had not understood. But in its heart, locked behind doors meant to contain rather than protect, he found a slipgate. Not active, not even powered, but present, waiting. Around it, scattered like offerings, were crates of ammunition marked with symbols he recognized. Argent cells, weapon modules, spare armor components, everything he needed, cached, here by people who had glimpsed hell and prepared for a war they would never fight. The Slayer stood before the inactive slipgate, running his hands along its frame, feeling the dormant energies within. He could activate it. With his suit's remaining power and the Argent cells here, he could open a path back to hell, back to his war, back to the eternal crusade that was the only thing he knew. Earth would be left to defend itself, but he had taught them what to look for, had shown them that demons could be killed. They had a chance now, slim but real. His hand hovered over the activation panel. Behind him, the facility's emergency systems flickered to life, responding to his presence, and monitors began displaying data from sensors he had not triggered. Amelia's voice crackled through speakers that should not have worked. "I found the facility's original logs. They were experimenting with dimensional resonance in 1951, trying to find unlimited energy. They found hell instead. Shut everything down and buried it, but not before they pulled through something else, a message, a warning. It said hell seeds itself across infinite realities, corrupting worlds one by one, and that the only thing limiting its spread is the lack of permanent gates. The scientists thought they were being invaded. They were wrong. They were being recruited. Hell wanted them to open the way." The Slayer's hand remained motionless. "I think Earth was always a target. The slipgate at CERN, our curiosity, our scientific reach, all of it made us perfect marks. But you changed the equation. You showed us what hell fears. Maybe that's enough. Maybe we can hold them off now. But only if you stay." The Slayer looked at the monitors, at her face pixelated and desperate, and then back at the slipgate. His war was not here. His purpose was not here. Earth was just another world that had touched hell and needed cleansing. His crusade spanned dimensions, universes, realities beyond counting. Staying here to babysit one species that could barely comprehend what was attacking them made no tactical sense. But he thought of the child in Geneva, the pregnant woman, the souls chained to Asmarath's neck. He thought of the 47 signatures still pulsing across the planet, each one a promise of suffering. And he thought of the simple fact that Earth's demons were different, adapted to local conditions, evolved to feed on human despair specifically. They were not Hell's standard forces. They were a specialized invasion, which meant hell considered Earth worth the effort, worth conquering slowly, carefully, permanently. The Slayer's hand fell away from the activation panel. He turned from the slipgate and walked to the ammunition crates, began loading weapons methodically, rebuilding his arsenal with the patient efficiency of someone who knew he would need every round. Outside, the world held its breath. Emilia watched the monitors, afraid to speak, afraid to hope. When his weapons were loaded and his armor patched with whatever components the cache offered, the Slayer stood in the facility's entrance, looking out at the desert night. 47 signatures remained. 47 battles. He could finish this, purge Earth's infestation completely. And then, maybe, he could return to his real war, with the knowledge that at least one world had been saved. He stepped out into the starlight and began walking toward the nearest signature, already visible as a smudge on the horizon. Behind him, the facility's systems finally failed completely, plunging the cache back into darkness. The slipgate remained dormant, an opportunity not taken, a choice made through action rather than words. Emilia watched him disappear into the desert, this silent warrior who had chosen their world over his war, and she began coordinating the global response to his crusade. If he was going to save them, the least they could do was try not to make it harder. She pulled up maps, calculated routes, identified support resources he might need. The militaries of the world synchronized to his campaign, clearing paths, evacuating civilians, providing overwatch and medical extraction for survivors. They could not fight beside him, but they could ensure he fought efficiently. The second signature fell in Mexico, a nest that had been growing beneath an Aztec ruin. The third fell in Morocco, a portal that had been disguised as a meteorite impact. The fourth, fifth, and sixth fell across Southeast Asia, Hell's attempt at a coordinated offensive that collapsed when the Slayer appeared in Singapore and fought his way north through Malaysia and Thailand in a 20-hour rampage that left 3 countries free and 14 major. Demon lords dead, he fought alone, but the world watched. Students made murals of him. Engineers designed weapons based on his methods. Religious leaders debated his nature during the day and prayed for his victory at night. He became myth in real time, a story, being written across continents, and the story said that even hell could be defied. By the time he reached the 40th signature, somewhere in the Australian outback, his armor was a patchwork of repairs and jury-rigged solutions. His weapons showed wear that no maintenance could fully address, but he moved with the same relentless purpose, and the demons fell before him like wheat before a scythe that had forgotten what it meant to dull. The 47th signature was in Antarctica, which made a certain terrible sense. Hell's final stronghold on Earth would be in the place most hostile to human life, where rescue would be impossible and isolation absolute. The Slayer requisitioned a military transport, the first and only time he had accepted direct assistance, and flew south into the white darkness. The portal was at the pole itself, buried beneath ice that had stood since before humans learned to make fire. The demons had hollowed out a cathedral beneath it, a space carved from frozen water and filled with corruption that turned ice black. The Slayer descended into it, fighting through guardians that had been stationed in shifts, ensuring fresh resistance every step of the way. He fought for 16 hours, deeper and deeper, until he reached the final chamber. The portal was vast, larger than any he had seen on Earth, its edges lined with machinery that predated human civilization. Not demon technology, but something else, something older that Hell had found and repurposed. Maker, his suit's database identified, and the Slayer paused. Maker on Earth, before humans, before anything. The Guardian was not a Hell priest, but something that had been human once, transformed and elevated into Hell's service. It called itself the Arch-Heretic, and claimed it had opened the first paths to Earth millennia ago, teaching ancient civilizations to worship the wrong things, seeding corruption that bloomed into modern despair. It bragged about its long game, its patience, its certainty that Earth would fall regardless of the Slayer's resistance. The Slayer let it talk while he examined the portal's structure, identifying weaknesses, cataloging systems. Then, mid-sentence, he drove the crucible through the arch-heretic's chest and into the portal's core behind it. The blade sank deep, its energy flooding into the ancient machinery, and the portal began to collapse. The arch-heretic laughed even as it died, blood bubbling between its words. "You think this is victory? We have seeded 1,000 worlds. 10,000. You are one warrior, powerful, yes, eternal, yes, but ultimately finite. You cannot be everywhere. Cannot save everything. Eventually, you will fail." The Slayer twisted the crucible, and the laughter stopped. The portal's collapse accelerated, reality rushing in to fill the void hell had carved, and the ice above began to crack under the strain. The Slayer ran, the cathedral disintegrating behind him, reached the surface just as the entire structure imploded. The ice sheet fell inward, creating a crater a mile wide, and when the snow settled, no trace remained of Hell's presence. Emilia confirmed the kill from her bunker, watching the 47th signature blink out on her displays. The world was clean. For now, for the first time since the CERN incident, no active portals registered on Earth. She opened channels, began broadcasting the news, and heard celebrations erupt across every continent. Humanity had been saved, pushed back from the brink, given another chance. But she was already pulling up the archives again, the fragments the Slayer had downloaded, and she was finding things that made her blood run cold. References to a cycle, to Earth being attacked before, in ages past, and repelling the invasions through means lost to history. Suggestions that the Maker technology at the pole had been a gift from a previous era's survivors. Warnings that Hell never stopped, never forgot, never forgave, and worse, equations suggesting that the Slayer's presence on Earth was not accidental, that the CERN experiment had not opened a random slipgate, but had called to him specifically, pulling him through because Earth's collective unconscious had been screaming for salvation loud enough to breach dimensional barriers. They had summoned him. Not deliberately, not knowingly, but the result was the same. Which meant when he left, the connection would remain, and Hell would use it. Emilia sat in her bunker, surrounded by celebrating colleagues, and realized that they had not won. They had bought time, possibly years, even decades if they were lucky. But Hell knew about Earth now, had tasted it, marked it, and the only thing standing between humanity and eventual consumption was one silent warrior who was not even supposed to be here. The Slayer stood at the southern tip of South America, looking out over the water toward Antarctica's distant glow. His war on Earth was finished. The planet was purged, its wounds cauterized, its people given a chance to prepare for the next invasion. He should return to the slipgate in Nevada, activate it, go back to Hell where his presence actually mattered in the cosmic scale. But he did not move. Could not, because some part of him understood what the archives said. Understood that leaving would doom this world as surely as staying had saved it temporarily. The crucible hung at his side, dormant but ready, and he stared at the horizon where the sun was rising in colors that were finally normal again. Emilia's voice found him through his suit's communication system, patched through satellites and desperate hope. "I know you can hear me. Know you understand, even if you never speak. I have something to show you, something we found in the ice. Please, come to Geneva." The Slayer considered the request for exactly 5 seconds, then he began walking north. The object they had recovered from Antarctica's crater was a fragment of the Maker machine, a piece that had survived the portal's collapse. Emilia's team had been analyzing it for 3 days, running scans that produced data so strange it seemed like the instruments were malfunctioning. But they all agreed on one thing. The machine had not been built to open portals. It had been built to close them, to seal Earth off from Hell permanently, and it had been operating for tens of thousands of years before Hell had finally found a way to corrupt and reverse it. "We think we can repair it," Emilia explained, standing in a laboratory that had been constructed in Geneva's ruins. Not fully, but enough to make Earth harder to reach. require more energy for Hell to establish gates, make invasions exponentially more difficult, but the power requirements are enormous, more than our entire electrical grid could provide, more than should be possible. The Slayer examined the fragment, his armored fingers brushing against surfaces that hummed with dormant potential. His suit interfaced with it automatically, translating its fundamental language, and he saw the truth. The machine was mica, yes, but it was also argent, a hybrid system designed to use Hell's own energy against it, creating a feedback loop that would make Earth invisible to demonic perception. It had worked for millennia, could work again, if it had enough power. The Slayer looked at Emilia, and she saw something in his posture that might have been resignation or might have been acceptance. He reached up and began removing his armor, piece by piece, until he stood in the undersuit that glowed with barely contained argent energy. The suit was not just protection. It was a reactor, a battery, a condensed star that had powered him through literal hell, and it could power the machine. "No," Emilia said, understanding. "You can't. Without it, you're just human. Mortal. You'll age. Die. And when Hell returns, we'll have nothing." The Slayer continued disassembling his armor, laying each piece beside the fragment, and his hands moved with the certainty of someone who had already made the choice. When the last piece was removed, he stood before her in the undersuit, and for the first time she saw him as something other than a walking myth. He was scarred, ancient beyond reckoning, exhausted in ways that went deeper than flesh. But his eyes, visible now without the helmet, held something that might have been peace. "You're choosing them," Emilia whispered. "Choosing us over your war." Simply began connecting his armor to the fragment, linking systems that should have been incompatible but recognized each other like lost siblings reuniting. The argent energy flowed from armor to machine, bleeding out his strength, his power, his immortality. The fragment began to glow, pulsing brighter with each connection, and Emilia's instruments went wild as power levels spiked beyond measurement. It took 6 hours. When it finished, the Slayer's armor was dark, drained, nothing but metal and memory. The fragment blazed like a captive sun, and Emilia's scans showed it propagating its effect globally, spreading a field that would cloak Earth from Hell's perception. Not perfectly, not permanently, but enough. For a long time, maybe long enough for humanity to grow strong enough to defend itself. The Slayer picked up his helmet, looked at it for a long moment, then set it down, walked toward the exit with the gait of someone who had laid down a burden they had carried for eternity. Emilia ran after him, caught his arm, felt muscle and bone instead of armored invincibility. "Where will you go? What will you do?" He looked at her, and she saw in his eyes the exhaustion of eons, saw the weight of battles beyond counting, of crusades that would never end, of rage that had sustained him long past the point where anything else would have. And she saw it drain away, leaving behind something almost human, almost at peace. He pulled his arm free gently and walked out into Geneva's rebuilding streets, and disappeared into the crowd of people who did not recognize him without his armor. Just another scarred man in a city full of them. Just another soul trying to find purpose in a world that had been touched by hell and survived. Emilia stood in the laboratory, surrounded by the drained armor and the blazing fragment, and she made a decision. She would guard it, maintain it, study it, and if hell ever found a way through again, if the shield ever failed, she would find him, wherever he had gone, whatever he had become. She would find him and give him back his war. But for now, Earth was safe. The Slayer was at rest. And the universe turned on, indifferent to both states, uncaring that for one brief moment, in one small corner of infinity, rage had been permitted to become peace.